So we're talking with WBZ's Kristina Rex, who has been reporting and monitoring the Karen Read trial every single day. When we spoke at the end of last week, we had kind of summed up the first 2 weeks of the trial, which had been moving very slowly. A lot has happened, though, this week.
Absolutely. Where do we begin? It feels like, well, I think we can summarize kind of the last week in that we have finally heard from all of the people who were, not all of, nearly all of the people who were out at the bar that night and then back at that after party at 34 Fairview Road, which we had heard so much about, but it took quite a few days to weeks of testimony to even start hearing from those people. So finally, we've heard testimony from about a dozen people who were actually with John and Karen that night.
Right. And it seems as though the defense is trying to establish in their cross-examination a lot of who did you see leaving when, what did you see? There was one particular witness who said that she did see something, but she was drunk and didn't really raise an alarm to anybody.
Yeah, and her testimony has become kind of infamous, the black blob, as she said. So
she didn't want to call it a person. She just said a blob.
Right. So that girl was Julie Nagel. She was at the house all night that night because she's a friend of Brian Albert Jr.'s. So she had been there for his birthday. She was never out at the bar or anything. And she got a ride home from Jen and Matt McCabe shortly before 2 a.m. They testified around 1:45 in the morning. She was in the back seat of that car being driven by the house. So the passenger side facing the house, driving by the house. And she testified that she was kind of seeing out the window, and in the area where John's body was later found, she noticed what she described as a black blob about 5 to 6 feet long. So much so that she actually said to her friend, "What was that?" And called out to her friend, and her friend turned and looked. But by the time her friend turned and looked, it was too late and they'd already driven by. Nobody so she's noticed. The only person who has testified seeing anything like that. And on cross-examination, as you mentioned, the defense, they pointed out she didn't tell police that the next day. She didn't tell police that in the next several weeks. She didn't actually tell police that for several months until
even
when
she realized that someone had died. She never mentioned it.
Exactly.
Okay. We also heard from the homeowner, Brian Albert, and his wife. What do you think was the most significant part of their testimony, or his especially?
I actually think a part of this significance was almost the lack of bombshell moments in their testimony, if that makes sense. I think we being the interested public had rested a lot on hearing from them. You know, we've heard a lot about this third-party culprit defense. The defense wants to pin this crime on several other people, Brian Albert being one of those people. But that didn't quite happen in his direct or cross-examination. Instead, it was more so about how well connected their family is, how he's a Boston police officer and maybe should have come outside when he saw flashing lights. The things that were, I think, did attract people's attention were on cross-examination, the defense asked him about some calls he placed and received to and from his friend Brian Higgins shortly after 2 a.m. 2 calls, only seconds each, both of which he claims must have been butt dials, a butt dial and a butt answer.
Because they were only a few seconds long.
One was 1 second, the one he called out, and the other one was over 20 seconds. But he claims he never picked up the phone and he was in bed with his wife at the time. So, you know, we got to see those, like you said, there's been so many minute details. When did so-and-so leave? What time did this happen? Did you answer this phone call? So his testimony was a lot of that. And also focusing on the fact that he's a Boston police officer who was trained and didn't go outside that night when there were first responders on his front lawn.
Sure, and they showed a photograph from a neighbor, and you could see lots of red lights, lots of activity outside, but the Alberts claim they slept through it and they just didn't pay any attention to it.
And he claimed that by the time he realized those people were on his lawn, John O'Keefe's body was already in an ambulance and even gone. Right. And so there was nothing for him to help with. There was no life-saving measure to be done. So he had no reason to go out there.
Interesting. And I know you've talked to the defense attorneys every day. They're very confident and think that they're well on their way to winning this case, pretty much. Talk about their demeanor and the approach that they've taken this week.
It is interesting. You can see when they do cross-examination, and this is defense tactic. With some of the witnesses, they've been really confrontational. Even with Brian Albert on cross, you could tell the defense attorney was trying to upset him, trying to get a rise out of him. He came in hot.
Yeah, and we did have one young woman break down in tears. Yes.
So it's been interesting to watch that, but you can tell at the end of the day, it's not my job. I'm not a juror. It's not my job to say who's doing great and who's doing poorly. But you can tell because we do get the chance to talk to the defense attorneys at the end of the day when they feel like they've had a great day versus when they haven't. So today, for example, we left and Alan Jackson literally said today was a great day for them.
Why did he think that?
Other day, he thought that today because Colin Albert, who was 17 at the time, was 20 years old now, was on the stand. When he was on the stand for direct examination, he came off as a very, very subdued, quiet kid who didn't remember a lot of details, but did remember that his friend Allie picked him up, screenshotted the text to prove the time she picked him up. Then on cross, it was messy. The defense attorney showed pictures of him from a month after this incident where you can clearly see he has injured knuckles in the picture. They showed videos he took a year or two prior to that where he's threatening to beat people up using foul language. So they tried to show he has this propensity for violence. So it was tough cross-examination for him. So that's the reason
they thought it was a great day.
Today, they thought it was a great day for them. The Black Blob day, when that woman testified to having seen something on the lawn, that you could tell they didn't think that was a great day for them.
Right, exactly, because she was establishing a different timeline than they had been adhering to. And this speaks to, they haven't yet, even though they have talked about how 3 other people potentially could have killed John O'Keefe, nobody's really presented a motive. Am I correct about that? There's no clear motive here. Why would these people inside the house want John O'Keefe dead?
You're correct. In any of the cross-examination, so 2 of their alleged 3 different potential suspects now have been on the stand, and there has been no motive established for either of them. So we haven't actually heard that in testimony in front of the jurors. As I've asked the defense attorneys about this after court, and they pointed out it's not their job to prove their version of the case. It's not. It's the Commonwealth's job to prove the case. It's their job to poke holes in it. So they don't necessarily have to give that motive. They just have to show that another option was possible. The third potential third-party culprit will be interesting. That's Brian Higgins. He has not taken the stand yet. But he is someone who they have hinted towards motive for, that being that he and Karen Reed might have had a flirtatious relationship, the 2 of them.
And so therefore, if he liked Karen Reed, he might have reason to have some kind of beef with John. And maybe it came to fisticuffs, and that might have led to some really intoxicated people taking a fight a little too far. And
we don't know when we're going to see Brian Higgins on the stand. I really think based on what we've heard, it won't be this week. It probably won't be until next week.
Right. Okay, let's take a quick break. And when we come back with WBZ's Kristina Rex, we will talk about who's coming up on the stand next on Friday of this, the 3rd week of the Karen Reed trial, and why that will be so significant. We'll be right back. We're back with WBZ reporter Kristina Rex, who's been following the Karen Reed trial, reporting every detail every day for us. And so Jen McCabe is probably going to take the stand Friday of this 3rd week. Why is she such a significant witness?
There's multiple reasons. So you and I had talked about how it seems like the prosecution is slowly inching in on the last people to see John and Karen. Right. Jen's getting real close. Yeah. So Jen is the sister of the homeowner, Nicole Albert. That's her sister. She had been out with someone at the waterfall that night. She knew John O'Keefe. She and her husband were actually the ones who kind of invited him and Karen back to the after party. Right. So they were the ones who gave them directions how to get there. Her husband just testified today that he was looking out the window. He saw Karen's car parked outside. They were the ones who were connected to John and Karen. Okay. And on the other side of this horrible event, Jen McCabe is the one who went out that morning with Karen searching for John and was there when she found his body.
When they were walking around the snow.
Yes. So Jen is the one who called 911. Jen was there when the police first responded. She was there when Karen Reed was hysterical. So that is why she is such a big deal. But of course, as you know, this whole case has been just like embroiled in controversy.
Yes.
There's one piece of evidence that I think the jury doesn't know about, but those of us who've been paying attention are waiting to hear about. And that's that Jen McCabe is the person who allegedly Googled how long to die in the cold. And she misspelled how, H-O-S, how long to die in the cold.
Right.
It disputed when she Googled that. So different experts will tell you different times that
Right.
was done.
This was mentioned in a New York Times piece, and this is actually very interesting just for everyone who searches things on Google. If you open a window on Google to search something, and we've all done this, it's then open on your computer for hours, and then you search something else. It will revert back to the initial time of the initial question, correct? So
I can't say for sure. But it's not an exact science, which I think is shocking for people.
Yes, I think people thought if legal teams, get your records in a document production about when you Google something or do something online, you're going to get an exact timestamp, and that's not necessarily true. And that is crucial in this case.
It's not necessarily true. It's crucial in this case because the defense claims that Jen McCabe Googled that shortly after 2 a.m. Why would she be Googling that shortly after 2 a.m. if everyone thought John O'Keefe was okay? The prosecution claims she Googled it the following morning once he'd been found. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that play out. Yeah. And that's part of the reason she is such an interesting person to hear from on the stand. And also because we haven't heard from anyone who was with Karen when the body was found.
Right. It's also interesting, and I've heard several people comment on this, that you could interpret that question in 2 different ways. Either someone is Googling, how long would it take someone to die in the cold, if you want to, find out before someone is left deliberately, or if you were searching for someone and you were concerned about their well-being. You could also Google how long would it take just to say, like, how long do we have to find him before he's going to be in real physical danger? So it could go either way.
And to speak to that, we heard the 911 calls earlier in this trial, and you hear a 911 call from Jen McCabe, and in it she's saying, we have a man out here, and she says at one point, I think he might have passed. Like, she's not sure if he's alive or not when she's calling 911. So it would be a reason to want to find out.
Right, exactly. And so you said Jen McCabe, who else after Jen will be the biggest witness to look for, the next event to look for as the trial goes forward?
I think the nearest and next biggest would probably be Brian Higgins. He's really the last piece of that 34 Fairview crew. He's the last third-party culprit defendant for the defense. Right. We don't know if the prosecution plans to call him, but he was out with everyone that night, and they've called everybody else, so it makes sense for them to call him. He's someone, and then other than him, Trooper Michael Proctor, he's the lead investigator on the case. We now know he is also under investigation, presumably for how he handled this case, because he does have longtime friendships with some of the witnesses in the case.
Right, and should he have disclosed that?
Right. And that is a big, big factor for the defense. So I think Brian Higgins and Michael Proctor are 2 of the biggest ones after Jen McCabe that people are waiting to hear from.
We also should mention the judge had ruled that Aiden Kearney could not be in the courtroom because he would be intimidating to witnesses that have been embroiled in he was jailed for publicly harassing a couple of people involved in the case, right? Talk a little bit about what the judge ruled about that.
Yeah, so Aiden Kearney, also known as Turtle Boy, is a blogger online. He's kind of credited with spearheading the free care and rape movement.
Right, and a lot of people follow along with his posting to see what's happening.
He is facing witness intimidation charges for a number of witnesses in this case because of incidents that happened long before this trial. So he received a press pass to cover this case as a journalist, just like I have, and like we all have to go in every day. And the prosecution asked for him to not be allowed in the courtroom. So the judge ruled, she had to balance between his First Amendment rights, freedom of the press, and also those witness intimidation charges and the safety and security of those witnesses. So she ended up ruling that he can be in the courtroom to cover the trial as a journalist for anyone other than those people he's charged with intimidating. So he's had to leave during
has he been
some of the
coming back and forth?
today he was there. He
Okay.
came, he picked a chair, and then he had to leave because Colin Albert's on the list. And so he could not be there for Colin Albert's testimony. There was one exception or two exceptions, I should say, that the judge made. The two state troopers who he is charged with intimidating, he can be there during their testimony. And that's because they're going to be testifying in their official capacity, the judge says. So they shouldn't be chills. There should be no chilling effect by his presence in the court.
Right. Okay,
Essentially, the summary of that is they're police officers, so they should have thicker skin, the judges say.
right. True. They're there in their professional capacity.
Yes.
In terms of the Free Karen Reed group of people who have been kept further down the street from the courthouse, you've been coming and going every day. Has that situation worked out? Has that crowd been reasonable and cooperating every day?
I think so. It's been the same, I don't want to say the same group, but the same size group every day. You see a lot of the same faces every day. They're in the same spot every day. I would say, depending on the weather, anywhere from like a dozen to 35.
Okay. And these are people who show up every day and they really feel committed, that they think they want to make sure justice is done, and they're there to say they're supporting Karen Reed.
They have signs, they have shirts, they are committed, their trucks say Free Karen Reed. They cheer for Karen as she walks out of the courthouse. Some of them bring their kids. It's an interesting dynamic. You almost see Karen treated like a celebrity, like the kids are begging for like a high five from her as she walks out. It's super, super interesting.
Right.
So
it's a case that's important enough to them that they're taking time off from work, time out of their lives to physically be there every single day.
Exactly. And some of them have been able to be in the courtroom. So I just know from seeing them all the time that some of them, and some who are considered more the leaders of the movement, there have been days when they have shown up dressed up and they're there sitting in the courtroom with Karen Reed's family.
They know that they're going to be there. Let's speak to her demeanor. Has there been anything notable about it as the trial has gone on? You said there were good and bad days. Did you notice anything different in her demeanor in the courtroom?
I think it's still similar to what I said last time we talked, which is that she's very serious when the jury's around. She's incredibly focused. And then she very much relaxes when the jury's gone. She talks to her family. She smiles. There was an interesting moment yesterday. You talked about that witness who cried. It was Allie McCabe, a 20-year-old girl. She was a teenager at the time. She cried on the stand because of the supposed harassment that she and her family have faced from people who support Karen Reed. And right after that, there was an interesting moment. You can find the clip online where Karen, you see her talking to her attorney, and she clearly looked stressed. Right after that had happened. You can tell it was like an oh no moment. And then to follow up on that, this morning, first thing, one of her attorneys moved to strike that testimony completely. And the judge ended up saying, no, we're not striking it.
Because I have to say it was sad to hear this young woman break down that people had emailed her school, had kind of, no matter what happens in the end, you could tell it was an honest, emotional, human
And for
reaction.
a murder trial, there hasn't been a ton of emotion in that courtroom.
True.
So to have that on the stand was a shocking moment.
Yeah. So she clearly did not like that.
No, it was, you could tell she had a very stressed out reaction after that happened.
All right. Good insight. Kristina Rex, you're the best. Thank you so much. And we'll continue following you and your reporting every day at the Karen Reed trial. WBZ's Kristina Rex. And we'll look for your update next week as well. Thanks, Kristina.
Right. Thanks, Paula.